Hello and welcome to another week of Netrunner videos. This week I was originally going to play my Valencia Echo Chamber deck, which I've played in a couple of recent tournaments and is available on Netrunner DB, because I wanted to play a runner. But during the course of the week, Peter Hopkins from Edinburgh sent me this tweet asking me instead to play Nasir. Now, I'm not one to shy away from a challenge, even if it is playing an exceptionally complex and difficult runner deck. And so, since I was kicking around an idea with something to do with shapers and something I wanted to try out, I agreed and decided to build a deck to do just that. And having played 5 games with it over this weekend, I'm very much looking forward to going up to Edinburgh for the second Intercity Friendly in January and finding Peter and rewarding him appropriately for his suggestion. So this is the deck I decided to put together. So the concept is based around, as all Nasir decks are, mitigating his disadvantage / advantage. So, for those of you not familiar, whenever Nasir encounters a piece of ice that was just rezzed, you lose all the credits in your credit pool and gain credits equal to the res cost of that ice, potentially gaining you anywhere from 10 to 40 credits over the course of a game, but at the same time guaranteeing that you can probably never realistically have more than 6 to 8 credits available to you in your credit pool. It also makes face-checking into multiple unres dice very difficult, and traditionally one of the ways I've seen people beat Nasir is just continually installing new ice for him to res into. Being essentially closed accounts by them resing a pop-up window or marker in front of you is a real headache for Nasir. So I built a deck to kind of work around these issues as best as I could. Now this is the second version of this deck. My initial deck looked a lot like this. There were a couple of changes. The original list had a Dinosaurus in and one less film critic, and those came out after a few test games just to make sure that this deck could actually win any games at all. So the basis of the deck is the Dogbreaker suite. The reason I chose to base it around that is that the hosted power counter allowing you to break subroutines means that when you're face checking into ice, all you ever need to do is have enough credits to match their strength. And if you look at the ice layout in all of Netrunner, I believe there are only 3 or 4 pieces of ice, serious pieces of ice that you wouldn't want to have their subroutines fire, where their res cost would not give you enough credits to then boost the strength of the appropriate dog up to the point where it matches, so that you can take your power counters off and break on and continue through on the rest of the run. So if you're using these breakers with the power counters, obviously you want ways to reset them. You want as many ways as possible, so we jammed in 3 scavengers and 3 clone chips to allow us to constantly reset the tokens there. And while we're resetting tokens, it seems like an excellent opportunity to put a single David in the deck as well. This is particularly because several of those ice that I mentioned where the strength is higher than the amount it costs to res are nasty sentries like Archer and Enforcer and Nebula. So Cujo struggles to get to strength to match those, so having a David available for when you see one of those on the field is very useful. And obviously we want the 3 self-modifying codes to fetch out our dogs and our David as necessary, and 3 utility ice, a single Atman. This is just for filling in what we can't quite get through, or dealing with servers where all of the ice is the same strength. So instead of having to deplete our precious dog tokens, we can just set an Atman at, say, 4 and run through an Eli server without having to throw away an entire dog's worth of tokens. We also put in a single sharpshooter and a single Deus Ex. Again, the sharpshooter's for, it's an archer which I can't break. And the Deus Ex is, I think, useful in the current environment. There's obviously a few assassins floating around now, plus a resurgence of PE decks. Having the Deus Ex available to you, especially with clone ships, can make those matchups much easier. In my test games, I had a long game against a Jinteki PE deck where he eventually conceded because he couldn't Ronin me to death with my Deus Ex after I'd levied. So talking of which, we have the Singleton Levy AR access. That's our ultimate insurance policy. If all our clone chips and scavengers and dogs are all gone and empty, we can trash as much of them as possible and levy back for another go round in an extremely long game. 3 diesels for draw. We tried to limit the number of events in here because the economy package is a technical writer and cache based one. So the reason for this is Technical Writer is obviously going to be able to take advantage of our constant installs and then scavenge reinstalls. And also with Nasir, what you want is the ability to go from a very low amount of credits to a very high amount of credits in one click. So Katie Jones traditionally fulfilled that role in the past, but she does kind of require an investment of 1 click a turn for a few turns to be able to give you that, hey, I need to burst up to 11 really quickly. Whereas Technical Writer just does it just by virtue of being in play while you're using your self-modifying codes, installing caches, and the like. So we've got a single order of, 2 orders of souls, and those are also meant to combo somewhat with the cache. Cache is obviously at its best when it costs you less to install, so 0 instead of 1. We're not Kate, so we can't do that. We're not running the cheap in the recurring credits for installing programs. But what we are doing is essentially trying to stay as close to 0 credits as possible. So with an order of soul in play and at 1 credit, we can install our cache, then regain our credit from the order of soul, and then we have the 3 credits on the cache available, plus an Aesop's waiting in the wings to drip us back up another 3 on the following turn. Film critics are absolutely crucial in this deck, it turns out. This was something else which I increased from 1 to 2 from the original version, because not having the ability to interact with things like NAPD or Future Perfect, because your credit pool is so drastically low at all times, means that Film Critic becomes an absolutely crucial drawer, and it also prevents you from losing to mid-seasons, which again, keeping a high credit pool is very difficult. There's not much protection versus the more obvious Sea Scorch, so we have a Singleton Plascrete just to kind of try and keep things going. 3 Armitage, they're cheap, they're only 1 to install, and you can again essentially take a pseudo day job off them if you need to, if you have that desire to burst back up to a decent level of economy. 3 R&D interfaces, and primarily the way we're going to try and win games is to R&D lock our opponents. We've got 1 HQ interface, and this is the contentious pick in this deck. Originally this 2 influence was for a clot instead, but the question became whether how I wanted to combat fast advanced decks. Did I want to have some HQ pressure so that when they score their astrolabe, my response would be to run into their HQ and vet it for agendas? Or did I want the ability to clot against them as they tried to fast advance out? And what I found originally when I had the clot instead was that because Nasir is often so poor, you very rarely have the credits available to land the clot. So I went for the HQ interface instead. It's a bit more proactive. It's a bit better in matchups which aren't fast advanced, but it does make us a bit worse against fast advanced decks. And then just a couple of Astrolabes as cheap consoles for memory. So yeah, generally the entire deck is intended to get to a low amount of credits, force your opponent to give you credits by running at them into stuff that you're hopefully not too worried about, then build up a rig, get all your hardware out, and then R&D lock them for the game. So with that said, let's see how we get on.